Next speaker, as an opening keynote speaker for this morning, is Rod Oram. Rod Oram has over 40 years experience as an international business journalist. He's a frequent public speaker on deep sustainability, business, economics, innovation, creativity and entrepreneurship in both New Zealand and global contexts. And again, you can read more context on Rod by scanning the QR code. Rod, the floor is yours. And just to say, we're not going to take questions after Rod's talk, not because we don't want to, but because he will be on the panel that we have after morning tea break. So pop your questions into Slido if you like, but we're not going to get to them right now, but it doesn't mean they will be forgotten. Thanks very much.
Atamarie, and it's a huge pleasure to be here. So thank you, Anita, for the invitation. And I very much look forward to all the discussion we're going to have today. Now, I take the word adaptation very seriously, but I'm focusing particularly on how we massively need to adapt our thinking. So it's about how we think and thus what we understand, and then what that leads us to in terms of the ambitions we set ourselves and how we behave as a result of those ambitions we set ourselves. The reason I'm framing it that way is that I'm trying to work out which button is going to move me forward. No, not that one. Can you go back to, right. Presentation mode, thank you. There we go. That there is only one Earth, of course, and there is only one solution. It's a very complicated solution that we have to get ourselves out of this climate jam. I'm going to start with this quote, which is a rather arresting one. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, we have medieval institutions, and we have godlike technology. It is terrifically dangerous, and it is now approaching a point of crisis overall. This was from a biologist, a famous one, Edward O. Wilson, and he said this a few years ago, back in 2009 in a debate at Harvard, just 4 or 5 years before he died. I think he speaks volumes and loudly. One way of measuring this is how rapidly we're breaking the 9 physical geochemical boundaries of the planet as plotted by the Stockholm Resilience Centres and its colleagues. So back in 2009, we had just breached a couple of them. The one in the top left is biodiversity. We had just started to breach the climate one alongside it. And down at the bottom, the boundary there is human-made nitrogen, i.e. fertilizer, that we put on our farms to grow food. By 2015, we had comprehensively breached some more boundaries and pushed those other breaches further out. And then just very recently, we had the latest update, and it looks like that, which actually looks like this, blown up. So you see how much damage we're doing in biosphere in terms of loss of genetic diversity, and then functional loss too. And then at 12 o'clock, climate change, and then down at the bottom is those geochemical flows, both phosphorus and nitrogen. And then, of course, round about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock is the land systems change. So we're having this huge impact in terms of how we change land to bring it into agriculture, and then the food we produce on that has all these multiple impacts. In fact, this is work from Boston Consulting, just 4 value chains in the global economy cause 90% of that biodiversity loss. And half of that loss is from food and beverage. And it's a pretty chronic case. When you look at the global food system, there's about $10 trillion US of revenue there per year. But if you add in all the uncosted negative impacts, whether it be on human health or on the natural environment or socioeconomically, those costs are 12 trillion. So very literally, the global food system, if we properly accounted, would be bankrupt. We know quite a bit about our own boundaries because we were the only country so far that had asked the Stockholm Resilience Centre to do a planetary boundaries study for us. And this was released in December 2020. MFE was very fond of this work, but snuck it out just before Christmas. And it's hard to find on its website, but there's a link, because it's a rather uncomfortable report. The world is taking this incredibly seriously. And so on November 30th, the COP28 starts in Dubai, the latest UN climate negotiations. And for the first time, there is a whole day given over to the theme of food and agriculture. But through the whole of COP, there is a food pavilion. So this very intense debate globally about how radically we need to change land use, agriculture, and thus the food we farm and consume, is getting a far greater prominence than ever before. And the balancing factor of this is how we help restore large parts of the planet, or help nature do so, thus the 30 by 30, preserving 30% and helping nature regenerate 30% of oceans and 30% of land, is a very important movement. But as you see, we've only got 15% of land under such systems, and 15% of fresh water and 8% of oceans are protected that way at the moment. So there is a lot to work on, and there is only this one solution, that the ultimate test of everything that humankind does is this, and that little asterisk is down, a little terms and conditions down at the bottom, which I always make very small because it reads the fate of humanity hangs on our actions, is that we have to ask ourselves, am I working with nature at this particular point, on this particular issue I'm working on, or against it? And it's a question we're not asking ourselves. We have some unique responsibilities in Aotearoa. We were the last large land mass in the world to be settled by people, only about 30 or 35 generations ago. Yet we've caused one of humanity's fastest descents from pristine to degraded ecosystems, and therefore our huge opportunity and responsibility is to help nature achieve one of its fastest, fullest regenerations, helped of course by extensive indigenous knowledge and wisdom. So we and the rest of the world will be doing a lot of current Western thinking and practice, which is linear, extractive, patriarchal, individual rights, etc. That's squareization is a phrase that could be used and has various ailments flowing from that. And we try to put that right by various legal remedies, but that's not nearly enough. We have to move to do two things. First of all, bring to a Western science and perspective true regenerative circular thinking practice and regenerating that partnership between humanity and nature, the commons, but bringing, of course, indigenous knowledge, very importantly for us, Mātauranga Māori, to this. And for me, one of the most exciting things about the 11 National Science Challenges has been the way these two knowledges have been coming together to work on issues, to learn new ways to progress. So back in 1900, Aparana Ngata, that wonderful Ngāti Porou leader, talked about how we bring Mātauranga Māori and Mātauranga Pākehā, his phrase, together, and the great benefit of casting our net between them rather in fishing in one or the other. The starting point of this is Kate Raworth's donut economy model, where there's the social floor as the inner circle and ecological ceiling, as defined by the planetary boundaries, as the outer circle, and the safe and just place for humanity is between the two. When Kate came to New Zealand now almost 6 years ago, some wonderful people offered her to our Maori version of this, where the floor is actually the ecological fundamentals. And that red circle there is our last breath. It's ecological foundation. So if we really screw up that ecological foundation, we would be heading for taking our last breath. Kate hugely endorses this. She finds it a very wonderful reflection on and compliment to the work that she and many others do in that donut economy space, which is very much about that circular economy, regenerative stuff. All this is fantastically difficult, and that question of how we turn anxiety into action is one I explored in one of the episodes of the video series I did in Newsroom earlier this year, drawing on the work of Nikki Hare from Auckland University and her work about the infinite game, about how we work together. Because simply the issues that we're dealing with are increasingly global, and yet by definition, any action on them is intensely local. It's about what happens on the ground. And yet we have to achieve this unprecedented speed and scale and complexity of change that humankind has never come within cooey of before. And the solutions require very strong learning communities that have a real common sense, a common understanding about what needs to do. So that's why I go back to that thinking, that question about we have to adapt very significantly about how we think and thus what we understand. And then the common purpose that we achieve through that, i.e. radically adapt what our ambitions are and thus how we behave. And so we generate true commonwealth in all senses of that word. But these are communities where individuals are valued, helped, and encouraged, and in return, they all participate, and we change in this together. But of course, each of us, however powerful we are, even if we were the Prime Minister of the country, or whoever, can only do essentially an infinitesimally small part of that. But together, we are essentially infinite as a species on the planet. If we each did that in infinitesimally small part, we could actually pull off this radical adaptation in how we think, what we understand, and thus what ambitions we set ourselves, and thus how we behave. Very briefly, this is the Jökull in Iceland. A few years back, in 2019, they put a plaque on the top. Ok is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. That's the message to our future generations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rod, and that's certainly a very powerful message. We don't want to hold you back from a morning tea break any longer. So we'll convene a panel after morning tea, which will be comprised mainly with people who work in the knowledge generation space, if you like, focusing on, what actually enables transformation. Is it feasible? Is it possible? And especially the more transformational side. I'd like to encourage you to pop thoughts and questions into Slido already. So you will get a chance to respond as the panel talks to put in questions that come up. But even just now, please let us know via Slido, what is it you really want to talk about? What do you want to focus on in the conversation we'll be having after morning tea and before lunch? And that'll help shape the conversation that we can then have together. So now it's time to break for morning tea we're not going to cut it short for 15 minutes, so at 11:10 we'll reconvene again. Thanks very much.